STEMology, the Young Scientist Survival Guide, Session 17. Hey guys, this is STEMology with Alina Adams. I hope you've all had a fun, relaxing weekend full of good food and good people. This is the 17th episode, and every single week I learn more and more from my wonderful guests and listeners. It is July 26th, which, if you keep track, means that we skipped last week, July 19th. I was vacationing and very safe, don't worry, I don't have coronavirus or anything, I'm doing well. But I thought I deserved a little bit of a break, I guess, from this crazy COVID year. And I almost want to say summer in quotation marks because this is just so unlike any other summer that I've experienced so far. And for this week's episode, we all have the pleasure to hear from Joesph Allen, a UMKC student that myself and so many other students that I know at UMKC look up to. He's such a great guy, and I'll let him give you a little more details about himself. Hi Joe, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you. So my name is Joesph Allen. I am a student at UMKC. I'm majoring in biology, minoring in chemistry. I have a biomedical sciences emphasis. And then I'm also doing the university honors. I'm set to finish all that out very soon. Yes, so that's the plan. As far as career or anything like that, I'm planning to go on to medical school, and currently I'm thinking about going into either neurosurgery or cardiothoracic surgery, but I figure once I get there I can make those more finalized decisions.
It is a bit soon for that. People ask me that question all the time. What specialty are you thinking of?
Yeah.
And I'm like, hit me up in about 4 years and I'll let you know.
Yeah, it's tough to pin one down.
Absolutely.
They all sound so interesting.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Well, this is awesome because this is a topic that many of you have reached out and asked about. So Joesph and I have been students for, a few years now.
Yes.
And so this podcast episode is basically our best advice for how to study effectively and clearly, so hopefully the best results come for test day.
Yes.
So we're just gonna jump in here. Do you have a go-to study technique?
I feel like one of the things that I learned once I got into college and I started getting into more advanced classes than what I had before, I realized that a lot of the different subjects kind of have different study techniques that you would, or at least a way that you would approach it. And so one of the things now that I do as I get into a class is kind of figure out how I would approach this topic and then adjust my studying based on what it is. So for instance, how you would study for a math class might be different than how you would study for a biology class.
Absolutely.
Or something like that. And so that's something that I had to learn because I know that in high school for me, I just read a lot and I kind of had a similar approach to a lot of different classes. So when all of a sudden you're sitting in a class and you have to keep up with that pace, then all of a sudden you have to kind of modify your technique.
I think that was something I kind of struggled with jumping from high school to college too, as I was a dedicated textbook reader. Yes. So that was how I tried to learn everything. But when you get to a class like organic chemistry and you have to draw out a bunch of molecules and mechanisms, you realize, okay, well, the textbook can only help you so much. So like you said, you definitely have to modify and kind of go with the flow as you're going through classes.
Yes, and actually organic chemistry is kind of an interesting one because I think that class in particular, I know that a lot of people have trouble with it, and I think it's because they kind of are approaching it from a study technique of reading the textbook or kind of this rote memorization type stuff.
Yes, especially as biology majors, just the raw memorizing everything, that doesn't work.
Yeah, and it's a very different type of material that you're working with. And it's actually very different from chemistry too, from a general chemistry 1 and 2 course to
Absolutely.
Organic chemistry.
Yeah.
They're completely different things to try to deal with.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm glad you brought that up. So maybe for studying, that's step one, is just figure out the best way to study for that course and what's expected of you, how you're going to be tested. Exams that are taken on a computer, so online tests are different than handwritten tests too. I don't know why. Do you feel that way, that they're different?
Oh, yes. Well, yes and no. For a little bit, there were a few classes that I knew the tests were going to be multiple choice, And when you have several options, it naturally is
kind
easier.
of triggers something
Yeah.
when you see the answer.
But it's also, those tend to be the questions as well where you could get tripped up based on the answers. Because, often when you have multiple choice, the MCAT is exactly like that. When you have multiple choice answers, often some of the answers will be an answer if you do the problem wrong or if you think about it in the wrong way.
Exactly.
And so I feel like that can sometimes trip you up more. For a little bit, I started almost studying differently for multiple choice type exams, but then I went back and I said, okay, no, I don't want to study like that. I want to study so that I really understand it.
Yes.
As though I don't have any answers. And then when I do the multiple choice, I'll be able to pull out the right one.
No, that's perfect. A trick that I learned is, for multiple choice specifically, is you look at the question, you come up with the answer, and then look at the answer choices and see what matches up. I think that's what you were saying, right?
Oh yes.
Yeah. That's a whole different ballgame, really.
Yeah, I'm very good at convincing myself if I look down at the answers, and if I pick one out and I'm like, that's
I do it all the time.
Yeah, I'll convince myself very well that is going to be the answer.
Exactly. So something that should help a lot of people doesn't really help me. I'm talking about flashcards. I don't know why. I get more from writing out the flashcards than I do from studying them. Maybe I'm studying them wrong. I don't know.
No.
But flashcards have never really worked for me.
Yeah, I'm actually the same way. When I do flashcards, and there's only been a couple topics, not even like the class, but just a couple things within a class where I've ever flashcarded it. And usually, once I write out the flashcard, that is the thing that I get it.
That's the study technique, is the handwritten note of that. Yeah.
And just kind of having them with me, and like I'll glance at them every once in a while. Then I'll remember, okay, this is, and it kind of refresh that. That
repetition is pretty crucial for memorizing, especially as biology majors. That's something that we do pretty regularly.
Yeah. I think the ones that I did flashcard, the like biochemistry and everything, flashcarding all of the different amino acids and their properties and so on. I thought that was really helpful. Also with Bio 109, where you get into all the phylogeny trees, and that is just rote memorization. You have to just know what it is. And so I felt like that was helpful, just to write it out on a card, and then I could kind of organize it in some way in my brain.
That's exactly what I was about to say, is when I was learning glycolysis, gluconeogenesis, all these pathways, I would write out each enzyme and substrate on a note card, and then I would physically organize them in place, so like a puzzle. And that helped me a lot more than like flipping front to back every 5 seconds. But which this is something we kind of talked on too, is handwritten notes versus maybe typing them out or something. What do you think about that?
I have never typed out notes in a class. All of the science classes, and even, math, science, anything STEM, I always write out the notes. And I actually have gotten into a habit of rewriting them. So I'll use the textbook then, and I'll say, okay, this is actually a definition that I want to write out, or maybe I'll watch a Khan Academy video or something, and then I'll copy down that same sort of logic just in my own words. So that I have that on a page, and I don't ever look at it again, but just the act of writing something down.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you said that, because everything you just said is my preferred method. So it wasn't until actually I transferred to UMKC that I saw that people actually type out their notes. I was like, I don't understand that. Is that for like efficiency? You want to be quick? You want to make sure you get every word? Is that what it was? But for me, it's easy to kind of get distracted. And so I don't prefer that, the typing out method, as well as handwritten. But when I got my iPad, I got the Apple Pencil, I was like, okay, so now my notes, might be safe. I don't have to worry about water damage or anything, I guess. And it's pretty quick to handwrite them on a device, I guess. So.
Well, and one thing, and that's kind of gets back to our point talking about studying differently for different classes. So like if I were in an anatomy class, what I always do is I would print out all the slides, and I would do like 3 slides or 6 slides per page depending on what I was feeling. And then I could make notes on the side so I could pay attention in the class. I I know that I have it written down in the slide or whatever,
Yeah.
the whole, maybe it's the definition of something, so I wouldn't have to copy down everything they were saying.
And waste those precious seconds.
Yeah, because you could miss something that's like, oh, they're adding a little bit more.
Absolutely.
And so then I kind of got into the habit of doing that for that type of class, and I would make notes as to points they were saying, and then I would like star things if they really put a lot of emphasis on a slide.
Anything that they say more than once is probably something good to star.
Yeah, exactly, because you know that that's something that that professor in particular is thinking about, and that might pop up later. Of course, there's like only so many hours a day, and you would love to know everything, but there is like an aspect of it where you do kind of want to adjust your studying for that person.
Yeah.
But something like organic chemistry, I would not print out. There were no slides,
Yeah,
so
that's
I
true.
wouldn't print out any slides, and I would just take notes.
For a class like that, at some point you kind of just have to autopilot, just write out everything, and then do a lot of studying later for maybe those little details, because you can't really get it all in the moment because you're just worried about keeping up. So it does get to a point like that. So how often do you think you review your material? How often do you study per class?
Again, I think it depends on the class, and it depends on the person too. Organic chemistry or a math class or something like that, I actually never review anything or look back at it, and I usually had it, which I know is not normal.
I was about to say, maybe listeners shouldn't hear this advice, because that will get you caught up for sure.
Yeah, no. But that was just because I knew that I had those things down, and if I ever had a question about it, I would go back and I'd figure that whatever the thing that was missing out, and I could target it and say like, that was the one that I didn't quite understand. And that would be, I guess, the point that I would make. Know yourself and know what you understand very quickly. When you only have so much time, you don't necessarily want to devote a bunch of time to something that you already understand.
That is true.
And so you want to like target that to something that maybe you need a little bit more time. But anything related to like a biology class, or where there's very specific definitions or something like that, that's something that as I was making the notes, just through the weeks that we would be going, I would go back and I would just flip through my notes and read through the pages, because I knew that all the notes that I took them for the purpose of writing my own study guide of this is what I need to really understand.
Because in college you're not really given a study guide, so if you're able to look at it from the professor's perspective of what's most important, the things that you would need to know for an exam, it's easy to keep track of it that way and make sure that you're studying the right parts of the class.
I think that's actually a really good point to make, is thinking about it from the standpoint of the professor. And so being able to recognize that there's kind of a pattern to how things are being presented to you. And if you can find the pattern, then it'll make sense why everything is in a certain order. Nothing tends to just be out of the blue, or just like random points. Yeah. There tends to be kind of a building pattern to it. And if you can like outline that pattern, then in your own mind you can say, this is the link that I'm missing.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So one thing that I think is kind of interesting is there's a lot of talk about how much time you should spend studying on all your classes, 2 to 3 hours of studying per credit hour of class. But one thing that I think everybody, especially in STEM majors, kind of recognizes really quick is that it's very difficult to do that when the expectation is that you're not only doing all the classes and everything, but often you're doing extracurriculars, you have work,
lives.
you have all this stuff that you have to do outside of classes and beyond studying itself. And so being able to center that time and make sure that you do devote enough time to your classes, but then still having a life, that is a really difficult balance. And I'm like in constant progress, trying to do it. But I do know that having an awareness of yourself in different classes and being able to assess where you're at, that is something that I think is really helpful. Especially if you go through a first exam or something and you get a very low score on it, that's something where you almost have to take a reassessment of all that timing to figure out, okay, I need to devote more time to this to ensure that I'm really understanding everything that I need to for this class.
Absolutely. I think it's easy to let school take a back seat for a second, but like you said, that self-awareness, as long as you understand that you have to designate some time, make some sacrifices, prioritize, all those good things that you hear about all the time from me.
That's one of the most difficult things with just being a STEM major to begin with. Yeah, is being able to kind of balance all that time, because you want to be successful in all those different areas, and often, you know, that's where I think the study tech part of it is really kind of important. I've tutored quite a bit during my time like at the university, and one of the things that I've kind of found is that often it's not how much you study, it's more about studying in a way that you can learn the most. And that was something that I kind of took for granted a little bit until I figured it out and I kind of saw, okay, this is actually something really important. You know, if you can figure out where your gap in the knowledge is, and say you go and you listen to a lecture and it didn't click, and you're, I don't understand it, but I'll go look at it again. You go read the textbook, still doesn't click. There's a ton of people who will go and they'll continue doing the same things. They'll, you know, do the panopto, they'll read the book, make flashcards from the book, and so on and so forth. This is very time consuming to do all that. That's where I kind of take a step back and say, well, if those two methods, it didn't quite click, it wasn't delivered quite in the right way that you would understand it, that's where you would want to segue and say, okay, let me find something else, like maybe another textbook or a video, Khan Academy, or, you know, something on YouTube. There's tons of them out there, and see if I can find somebody else explaining it in just the right way that now I'll get it. Yeah. Because once it clicks and you kind of have that epiphany moment, then all of a sudden you have it, and then all of those other methods will make sense.
I think you're right. I think that's a huge gap and misconception, is that people think, oh, maybe I'm just not putting in enough hours, or maybe I'm not. There's not really an understanding that perhaps none of it is working, and I need to look at a third avenue, bring in a third party, and see what can happen. And I love that you mentioned YouTube and Khan Academy. Sometimes I notice that it helps even if you go to a different professor.
Yeah.
So you also mentioned you were a tutor. Are there any other resources on campus you think would be helpful?
I do think tutoring is really good if somebody wants to do it, because having that one-on-one is really nice. The reality is thinking about, how can I learn this? And I'm actually wanting to understand this, and maybe I'm just, you know, talking to another student or something like that, which is what tutoring is.
Yeah, that's really,
Yeah, to figure it out. And so I think avenues like that are really excellent to pursue, especially in a class that you're having trouble with. SI, there are definitely a bunch of classes that I've been in that I will go to SIs consistently every single week, regardless of whether I need it or not.
Also office hours. So whenever I study, I usually have this app. It's called Focus Keeper. And so it keeps you on track for about 30-45 minutes until, you know, you take a break. And so I know for a lot of people, social media is kind of that diversion. It's always there, you know, so it's kind of hard to stay on track sometimes. So what are your favorite attention directives to stay focused on your task?
I've never used an app. I should though. But
I didn't start until last year, and it kind of changed the game a little bit.
Yeah. So I usually will stick my phone in the other room on silent, and that is just gone.
That's dedication,
It does not exist for however long I'm studying. I think one of the really important things is to truly, I know this is like kind of maybe redundant, but to truly focus, and you're removing all of the distractions. And that's one of the things where I think sometimes studying with a group of friends, I find it very difficult, because there's conversations happening and there's, you know, noise and whatnot. I know that that's a normal thing in life, that you have noise around you, but sometimes it's really good to just limit all of the other distractions and almost put yourself in a bubble and say, okay, I need to just take a minute to be in my own head and think about this.
Absolutely. Just don't give yourself any other option but to focus on what you're doing.
Yeah.
So I feel like it kind of, for me at least, it works the opposite as well, where if I'm at a coffee shop or surrounded by noise, then I can also put myself in a bubble that way.
Yeah, because it's almost like the white noise.
Exactly.
Yes.
Yeah. Do you listen to music or anything?
No, because I'll start listening to the music, and you know, and I'm liable to like sing along.
Yes, no, I totally do that. Where if I'm listening to music, it has to be like those nature noises and
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
all those
some
things
are.
that make you want to fall asleep.
Yeah.
Some Inya. So now that we know how to study effectively, what are some ways to take effective breaks so that you're ready to just get right back into it?
One of the things, and this is like all around with studying in general, you don't want to be thinking about it as though it's sort of an obligation or a chore, but more it's your time to figure something out. And so one of the things that I've always felt is that it's good to be aware of yourself, and if you're understanding something, if you're not understanding something, maybe you need to take a minute and step away and just like go for a walk and then come back and think about it on your walk and kind of build yourself back up into it so that you're always kind of have that motivation of, okay, I'm here to understand that. Of course, that being said, there's always those moments where you are kind of have this feeling like I constantly want to be drawn away, and being able to just, I'm here for a minute, I'm going to figure this out. And so often what I will do, like even before I start studying, is I'll build myself up into it. I know this is goofy,
no,
but
I'm learning here. I like it.
and I'll like watch some videos on YouTube that'll be like sciencey, and they don't have to be related to the topic at all, but it just kind of gets me in that mindset.
Yeah, kind of excited, like, okay, I remember why I love this major.
Yeah. So I think that's really something that's helpful to me. And then when I'm taking a break or something, if I'm eating or like making myself coffee, I keep myself in the mindset. So even if I'm taking a break, I'm still like kind of in that feeling of, okay, I'm trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
And that helps me so that I don't completely disconnect.
Absolutely. I love that mindset, because I think the first thing that you said was that kind of making yourself steady. It really shouldn't be that you're making yourself steady. It should be like, I want to learn this, I want to do well, I want to understand, instead of just, here we go again,
Yeah. Well, and that's one of the things that I've thought about with a lot of stuff in college, and of course all of the career paths that we're going into, is there's kind of this feeling that you get where, when you're studying, it's all about studying for exams, or you kind of have to have this planned thing where you study for such a period of time, and then you take a certain break, and then you have certain meals and so on. And it's not organic. And that's what I feel like is sometimes stifling. People don't learn like that. So when you were a kid and you were learning, that's not how you figured things out.
Absolutely.
You just kind of played with it until you, like all of a sudden it clicked, and it's like, oh, I get this now.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes breaking out that mindset is almost more important in terms of studying than kind of regimenting or figuring out like a more certain sequence of, I'm going to do this. When I look at the different classes, and this is kind of gets back to all these points that we've been talking about, recognizing certain classes and how would I study this, or recognizing, okay, if I'm in this type of class, how would I take those notes, and is this helping me in being able to do that self-assessment, and then taking that all the way to like, okay, now I'm sitting down and I'm figuring this out, and I'm using different resources. All that stuff comes together to just a simple like, I'm just trying to learn something.
Yeah.
And I want to understand it.
It really does have to be that simple.
Yeah. And I think that's a really good, there's enough complicated things in our lives that you don't want to bring all of that stress into studying, because it makes it so much harder to remember stuff.
I like what you said earlier about it being a chore. Like, nobody likes chores. You shouldn't make yourself do things. You should want to do them. You should make it a goal outside of just
because you're passionate about.
That's what I love.
I think one of the things, like the reason that we are all in this major, regardless of what field we're going into, there's a part of all of us that we actually like looking at something like, I understand that, and you can kind of get that epiphany moment, whatever it may be. It may just be like, this is interesting, and I love the fact that it's interesting and cool, but holding on to that and saying like, okay, well, I can apply that same sort of passion when I'm sitting down and doing the actual work to get there.
Yeah. Something that I realized helped me a while back was I used to actually imagine myself in a situation where I would need this information, because sometimes I know when you're thinking about maybe algebra or whatever, you're like, okay, like, miss me with this, because none of it, I don't see myself needing this when I'm doing whatever future job I have. But if you can maybe find a situation where you would need it in the future, I think it's a lot easier to want to learn it.
We're STEM majors, but we're also in classes that are not STEM related. And so, like, say you're in a history class, or, like a literature type deal, or something like that. Often, what I would find is when you're in those classes and you find other people who are kind of, they're going in a direction of a career in STEM or something, there would be less interest in those classes. They're, I just have to do this for my major, and so on and so forth. But that's one of the things I've never really liked that thought, because all of those different things, whether it be like philosophy, or maybe it's history, or whatever it might be, there's something that you can gain from that. And
yeah, absolutely, it
may not be apparent how you might apply that to your future career, but it makes you a better person as a whole.
Overall,
yeah. And so, like, philosophy, just to use as an example, there's like a lot of things in philosophy that may not relate at all, but the actual concept of thinking in a philosophical way, and ethics and morality behind that, that's something that when you actually become a doctor and you have to make tough decisions, or whatever field you're getting into, you're having to make decisions. Your STEM classes like cell bio may not help you make a certain decision, but having that background of, okay, I can think this through, or knowing, okay, this is what happened in history, and I don't want to repeat the mistakes of the past.
It's also just a huge, like, interconnecting web. Like, everything is related to something else in one way or another. And so it's kind of just being able to step back and look at something in a full picture. If you are able to draw from all these different areas, like art and history and government or whatever else, and relate it to your field, like you said, like, you're able to put it all together.
Yeah.
If you're a STEM major, your whole goal is to make the world a little better,
Yes.
no matter what it is.
Yeah, and apply that knowledge, because there's responsibility that comes along with that. I've definitely been there a million times before, where I'm on the back end of an exam, or that is the whole thing, and I just have to, like, go through all the motions and do all this stuff and figure out all this, and study for this many hours and this and that, just to kind of get through. But then remembering that, okay, this is my choice.
Yes.
And I'm choosing to be here, and I'm choosing to do this, and it doesn't have to be miserable. I can have fun.
Exactly.
Like, I get to choose
Yes.
how I feel about it.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times it's hard to, like, when you get the syllabus, you see all these things that you're about to learn, and you're like, okay, so this is going to be a trek. But like you said, you just have to have fun with it, and you got to make it your own, because this is your choice. No one's forcing you to spend thousands of dollars on this education. So,
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for dedicating your time and being here. I know that there was a lot of information we just threw at everybody, but hopefully they get something from it. It was some good stuff. So
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
In the next episode of STEMology, I want to talk about volunteer work. It is so important to be an active part of your community and doing whatever you can to make it a better, more inclusive, overall beautiful place. Volunteer work is one of the best ways to have a direct impact on all of the places that you love and visit most often. The next episode will focus on the best ways to serve your city, your town, your neighborhood, whatever. And I'm pretty excited for this discussion. There are so many awesome opportunities that I cannot wait to share with you. Share and subscribe to listen to this episode and plenty more like it. If there are any additional questions you have and need answered, go ahead and send me a quick message at stemologyYSSG@gmail.com, or you can reach out to me on our Facebook page, Instagram at the Stemology Podcast, or Twitter at stemologyYSSG. Thank you for listening to our 17th episode of Stemology, a Young Scientist Survival Guide. Tune in with me, Alina Adams, for episode 18, Volunteering. See you next time.